We are at the start of the Indiana-Illinois game. All signs are pointing to this being a great matchup between two top 25 teams. But what nobody expected was about to happen and waiting for us on the horizon. And that was the most unexpected blowout in college football history. But to truly understand this monstrosity of a game, we are going to have to go back. And what better place to go back than to last year, and what better team to start with than the Hoosiers? Because you see, the way last year started for them was not too unlike how this year began. Last year was their first year with Coach Cignetti, and he had taken over a team that was coming out of a pretty low point. The previous season, before his arrival, they had gone 3-9, which was a step down from the 4-8 they won a year before that seemed like everybody was just having their way with them. I mean, tough schedule aside, Ohio State blew them out by 20 points. Maryland absolutely throttled them before Michigan handed them a 45-point loss as Rutgers and Penn State took turns on them next as they got their third win, which was their second win against an FBS opponent in Wisconsin the week after, before dropping their final 3 games in heartbreaking fashion. So when Cignetti was brought in, yeah, people were hoping he'd be able to turn things around, but I don't think they were ready for how around things would truly turn. They opened their season against FIU by throttling them 31-7 before moving on to Western Illinois and dropping 77 points on their head before completely dismantling UCLA, beating the Sonic Coins out of a Charlotte 49ers team, and in their second week against a Big Ten opponent sent a strong message as Maryland got demolished 42-28. Northwestern would follow that up by getting slaughtered 41-24, and a team who even in their down years are known for having a decent defense seemed to turn around and be the sacrificial lamb as Cignetti would drop 600 all-purpose yards on Nebraska as they slaughtered the Huskers 56-7 as 5-point favorites, mind you. This put all of college football on high alert as Washington would get beat by double digits and Michigan State would get the ever-loving breaks beaten off of them as despite having a point differential of 296, they were still being gatekept out of the top 12, pretty much based on one factor. They hadn't played any ranked opponents. That's right, just by pure happenstance. Teams who usually find themselves randomly ranked just happened to not be this year. UCLA was just a few years off of a ranking and was unranked. Nebraska, who's constantly in and out of the rankings, was unranked at 4-1. Washington, who was literally in the national championship the year before, was coming into this game at 4-4. And Michigan, the winner of the national championship the year prior, was now 5-4 coming into Indiana week. So after a gutsy 20-15 win over the Wolverines, despite being 10-0, the allegations of Indiana being a fraudulent team were lingering in the air. And then they ran into a red-hot, pissed off Ohio State Buckeyes team, and Ohio State that, mind you, would later win the national championship, and they got stuffed. They were held to just 153 total yards of offense. The Buckeyes had their way with them. Despite the fact that they lost to the number 2 team in the country, it knocked them all the way down to 10th in the nation, now at risk of one wrong move, knocking them out of a playoff spot altogether. And this just felt unfair. Heck, when Georgia lost to Alabama, they only dropped down to the 5 spot early in the season. But now, Indiana was fighting for dear life and had a point to prove against Purdue, and we get to see what happens when Indiana has a point to prove. As poor Purdue, who already had a bit of a tough schedule, was not about to get any easier as they became a bulletin point for why Indiana should go to the playoffs, as they were held to just 67 yards of offense as Indiana dropped over 570 yards on them in a 66-0 blowout. But if that wasn't bad enough, they make it to the playoffs and are the first game and have to face Notre Dame, who was in rhythm as Indiana went from this gutsy Cinderella story of a team to the laughingstock of college football as SEC fans everywhere were taking pop shots at them for their perceived embarrassing loss to the Fighting Irish. And while looking back, we can take away that their only losses this entire season were to the 2 national championship contenders, and that every one of the lower seeds in the first round got embarrassing losses, and Indiana's was actually the closest game of the bunch. For most people, it was just forgotten. leaving the embarrassment to the Hoosiers with no rectification. At least not that season. Which leads us to this year, 2025, where do you want to see what a pissed off team looks like? Well, once we get past this sneakily good Old Dominion team, where only winning by 13 points dropped Indiana down to number 20, they blow the brakes off Kennesaw State, who, despite appearing to be a better team than the previous year, only moved them up one spot in the AP polls, where now Indiana just has to do whatever they can to Indiana State to show that this Hoosier team is still on fire, as they hold them to less than 80 offensive yards and put up 680 yards themselves in a 73-0 domination. But despite all of that, they only were able to get their rank down to 19, as it seemed like once again the committee wasn't going to take them seriously as a team unless they absolutely had to. The difference though from last year and this one was that the team in front of them, the Fighting Illini, were sitting at rank number 9. And to any of the players or coaches on this Indiana staff, this game was their chance to prove a point. But it might have actually held more weight to longtime Indiana fans. You see, around 15 years ago, when the current Illinois head coach Bert Bielema was coaching at Wisconsin, he handed Indiana one of their worst losses of all times, as over the course of a regulation 60-minute game, he dropped basketball numbers on the Hoosiers, putting up 83 points as Indiana could only respond with a pair of touchdowns and field goals to lose by 63 points, which is a number that I believe the Indiana faithful would feel pretty rectified to see on the scoreboard. And this Illini team was no slouches. I mean, just last year they went on a tear, knocking teams out of the top 25. Kansas got knocked out in week 2. Nebraska got knocked out in week 4. Michigan in week 7. And yeah, they had 3 losses on their schedule, but those came from 2 top 10 teams in Penn State and Oregon, and well, Minnesota. But hey, after the season, they played one of the grittiest, grimiest games against South Carolina as 10-point underdogs and won. And not only did they have a good season last year, but they were returning a bunch of starters, so they opened up the season already ranked at number 12. And while Indiana was in a dogfight with ODU, they were crushing Western Illinois under their foot before completely embarrassing Duke and shutting out Western Michigan to earn their rightful spot, at least we thought, in the top 10. So that's the stage coming into this. And you may already see some of the underlying tone as to why this might not be as unexpected as it appears at first glance. Yes, Illinois was ranked at 9, but Indiana is coming in after maybe their best season of all time and have a giant chip on their shoulders. But even with all that weight on this game, I don't think anybody expected what happened, which is after a pair of punts, Illinois lines up to punt for the second time this game, and somebody comes through scot-free to block the kick, and the floodgates open. And while it appeared like Illini had some fight in them, as they immediately get a huge 59-yard touchdown pass, Indiana answers. And after Illinois can force one more punt, largely on the back of 2 incompletions, Indiana figuratively gets on top and begins a ground and pound that has never happened to a top 10 team before. 3-and-out Illinois, 7-play touchdown. 4-and-out Illinois, 4-play touchdown. 3-and-out Illinois, 9-play touchdown. Illinois crawls into the halftime, nose broken, teeth missing, but with a field goal to close the gap, as it was 35-10. And that was the good half Illinois played. The Hoosiers would immediately come back out, 75 yards to score. They would hold Illinois to -6 yards on 3 plays while forcing a punt, before driving 44 yards in the end zone and holding them to another negative drive and forcing another punt where they would take that drive 69 yards to score. Illinois was broken, and they ended the game with another punt and an interception as Indiana scored and then knelt it down. Final score, 63-10. Something Indiana last year had only done to their lowliest of opponents, and now a team who had held opponents to an average of 7 points across 3 games had almost 600 yards of offense dropped right on their head. All in all, you can call it what you want. Maybe it was a bad matchup as Illinois could only account for 2 rushing yards. Maybe it was just a gaggle of mistakes. Maybe it was Indiana taking out all their frustration from the disrespected rankings on the first top 10 opponent that looked their way. But for a team that was favored by a touchdown to beat a top 10 team by 53 points is without a doubt the most unexpected blowout of all time.
63-10 your final against number 9 Illinois.